Great peace, great peace, great peace. So I am back with another one of my videos, and I'm glad that I went on this journey because it's kind of laying a foundation where, people can learn from my experiences. I can learn from their experiences. A lot of content creation is starting to come with this new age of streaming and technology. It's coming. So I want to talk about, sibling rivalries and how, you have parents who may be a father, who may be a mother, where a difference. So, I noticed that in Africa, they don't have this problem with identity. They don't really have it. While some people may say, well, this culture may be new, this country may be new, this nation may be new, this language may be new, they don't deal with the identity crisis that Americans deal with. Like me, for instance, I grew up in a house where only one of my siblings stayed here out of four. And my fifth sibling, my younger brother, he was, aborted. Sibling rivalries with all of them. I was the only one that got beat with extension cords and belts. No one else got beat, and I could see like to today where, the respect level between me being an older brother and a younger brother, it's not there. They look at me like, who this African MF think he is. It's kind of like that, really. I don't really know all their views. I don't really know like how they all feel about, how I look at things and how I see things. I don't really look at them as being political, like my political aspirations, and as much as I've come, it's kind of been like reluctance to share. I don't really see a need to share my journey with everybody, but if you stumble upon my channel, you're here, you're learning something because I'm here to share. But, as far as with people who live in the communities that I lived in and live in, like it's no need for me to want to gravitate to them and learn anything about them, because like, I look at like how, the life that we lead, the life that we come upon, the life that we, tend to make for ourselves, everybody has different experiences. You know what I mean? Like everybody's not meant to come with you on the journey that you're taking. The people who grew up with, the same mother, different father, they're probably not going to be close. People who grew up with the same mother and father, they're probably going to be close, because he's going to be there to say, you all need to do this, and she's going to be right behind him, in a feminine sort of open armness, and she's going to say, what, you all need to listen to your father, and he's going to say, ask your mother. It's going to be that, so because my father, he grew up with both of his parents in his home, and all of his siblings have the same mother and father, and it's like 4 or 5 of them. So you have to clap your hands to that because they stuck together. You have a mother and, you're growing up in a community where everything is kind of like on the table, has to be taken. You don't have a father there to steer you like, no, don't do this to your younger sister. Don't do this to your younger brother. Then it's one of those situations where you all are fighting over the remote for the television. You all are fighting over the last piece of fish that's in the refrigerator. You all are fighting over who's going to take a shower that night. It's that type of thing. And like among other things, you all are fighting over who's going to get, the mother's last dollar so you all can go to the candy store or something like that. It's that type of thing. But like, if I've ever got into trouble to a point where like I was looked at as the black sheep, which I am, right? It was because it was something evolved in the family nucleus that kind of put me in a situation where like I was neglectful in school or neglectful this day with as far as holding up my responsibility and not being accountable for myself within a community. It was because of that. It wasn't because I was, this day I felt like I needed to go out and do something to somebody. I've never been that type of person. I've never been a bad person in that sense. That sounds kind of wild, but I've never been in any other sense. Like, I've never been a person who's caused problems within a community. And if I was the cause of something, like being bad at a tender age, it was because of, the family structure just wasn't there. Um, again, like, I've never been the type of person to go out and, cause trouble with other people. You know what I mean? Like, that's not my culture. That's not the culture that I've recognized or come from. Even though it's around me, I just don't look at it as in importance. You know what I mean? You know, the internet was the best thing to ever happen to me. When I got the chance to read up on Africa, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I finally got to see myself in a reflection, in a light that was carried by a lot of other people, and they all looked like me, from complexion to body temperature to body size to stress levels and stress temperament and all of that. Like, I was able to relate to Kenyans, to Ugandans, to Nigerians, to Ghanaians. I was able to relate to them all. Like, I don't know, like, as far as like, if you're a young person, right? Where you have a mother or a father who was kind of neglectful to a sense, where she just had children by all different types of men. I would hate to be the dark-skinned son, with 4 biracial sisters or 4 biracial brothers. I would hate to be that person. And I know it exists in America, right? They just don't show it. I would hate to be that person. And that's what I mean. Like, when you have that degree of carelessness that happens in your community, where your mother is not responsible for who she lays down with and how she continues to progress, in a sense that she's carrying on the legacy of her parents, being that we're all black, right? That's an issue, that's an issue. Like me, I've only got to confide into my cousin, right? Because, I looked up to him when I was growing up. He was like a year older than me or two. I looked up to all my cousins, my cousin Phil, my cousin Charles, my cousin Jay, all of them, I looked up to them. And like, to me, always looked at like the fact that, I didn't have an identity crisis growing up, in that sense where I was going to act out, or I felt left out. I never felt left out around my cousins, because we all looked alike, you know what I mean? And we had the same grandfather, and like, it was no need for me to want to go out into the community and find other people to be around. I never felt that way. Like all my cousins, right, the ones who I was always around, they were always older than me. You know what I'm saying? And that's like by 2 or 3 years, right? 2 or 3 years, two at most, right? 2 years. To me, like, that was the best thing ever. You know what I'm saying? And like, as we got older, we took chances about the things that we saw as important. Some of my cousins got married. Some of my cousins got into business deals that, may have went good or bad, doesn't matter. Whatever it may have been, right? We all jumped out and became mature to the experiences of us becoming adults. And, I always looked at like the petty differences that siblings had. It was just to me, like when I look at it, it's from not having the same father and not really caring. Because the older you are, the different experiences that you have than a younger sibling has. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that simple. And like me, I always gravitated to Pan-Africanism. I always gravitated to deep colors that taught a story. You know what I mean? I always gravitated to that. There was one point in time where I felt like, blue represented light-skinnedness. And then there was another time where I felt like red represented dark-skinnedness. And, as I got older, I started to see that, everything has its own image in everything that it sees. So it just isn't that a color represents one thing, but what you really see is that the colors of the entire rainbow, what does it represent? And then you go into the fact that there's a hiddenness in the color black, where all the colors come from black, then that's where you got to figure out what all the color spectrums of black is. And then when you find that out, then you see now what we gravitate to is something that's going to tell an entirely different story than what we've been used to. Having a older sister and a younger sister and an older brother, then a brother who was aborted, right? A younger brother, because I really would have had 4 siblings, so you kind of look at it as, an experience that's just not forgetting, and everything that you experience is a tale to inform someone else who may be going through the thing that you're going through. I look at young people today and I always say, you know what, do this and do that. And if they listen, they listen. If they don't listen, then, they're going to have to learn on their own. I always try to tell young people, like, invest into traveling, invest into, when you get a certain age, right? Invest into certain monies that you find around the world. The nations that you like the most, the people that you like the most, invest in that currency. And these are the things that I try to tell young people because, when you get old, you don't want to regret having done everything that you needed to do. Don't just stay in that same community that you grew up in by the time you turn 18, 19, 20. Leave. That's the same thing I did. I came back because I was having financial problems. Had I would have known, maybe I should have just stayed. But, when you're communicating to someone, these people, if they are experiencing what you experienced at that point in life, they may not come back. You know what I mean? They may stay as a point where you didn't stay, because people value certain things at a certain age. Some people are just more mature than others. But what you see is that, nothing in the experience in which you take is taken for granted. Everybody understands their experience better than the person who is just looking at them experiencing it. So, sibling rivalries, they could, my mother, she didn't know how to handle them, she didn't know how to handle them. To this day, she still doesn't know how to handle them because she sees beauty in things that are lighter than her. That's what she sees comfortability in it. Like me, I always looked at things like, what? I see how I'm treated around certain people. And I see how people view me. They don't necessarily have to say how they view me. I can just watch their temperament. And I've always thought, like, what? Let me take this thing of teaching children and teaching teenagers and teaching adults, how to respond to certain situations where, it may not be for them to be, or it may not be for them to experience. Even when you look at the fact, like, what is the black community? And you look around and you see that, there's no such thing as a black community because, of the actions that were taken by people who came before us. There's no black bank. There's no black schools. There's no black governor. There's no black mayor. There's no black president. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't exist. So when you finally find out, like, okay, in this experience where I have to experience everything before it is too late for me to experience, I need to take into account that, blackness has to be my experience. I can't experience other people's, things or way of thinking if I haven't experienced my own. So when I'm experiencing my own, I quickly find out that sibling rivalries, it isn't worth it. The responsibility then comes of having your own family. Doesn't mean that you have to have a child, doesn't mean that you have to adopt a child. It just means you have to know who you are, because when you're able to help people who come from your experiences in your walk of life and they've experienced certain things like xenophobia, you start to take those things seriously and you pour into it. You give it your mind, you give it your thought, you give it your whole overall being. And you know what? You make the better plight for the next generation who's coming after. You make it better for them. So that's all I want to say in this video is that, sibling rivalries, I feel for those who have to go through that type of stuff, because I went through it. But like, your family is in the people who you most associate with. You know what I mean? And that's what I learned growing up when I was 14 or 15. I was always with my cousin. And I got to learn from him. So like when you're able to learn from people and you're able to learn from certain experiences, it's priceless. You can't do anything with that journey but accept it. It's priceless. So great peace, Yakoki.